The twin suns of the outer rim cast long shadows across the abandoned mining moon. Theron had been tracking the energy signature for 3 days now, and it was driving him crazy. Something had crashed here recently, but the readings made no sense. No distress beacon. No identifiable ship signature. Just a faint pulse that shouldn't exist. He moved carefully through the wreckage field, his massive scaled body barely fitting between the twisted metal debris. The war had left scars on every corner of the galaxy, but this place felt different. Quieter. Like the universe itself was holding its breath. That's when he heard it. A sound so alien, so completely out of place, that Theron froze mid-step. It was small. Fragile. Desperate. A cry. His warrior instinct screamed danger, but curiosity pulled him forward. Behind a collapsed bulkhead, half buried in red dust, lay an escape pod. The design was ancient, primitive even. And that sound was coming from inside. Theron's clawed hand trembled as he pried open the damaged hatch. The metal groaned and finally gave way. Inside, wrapped in thermal blankets that had long since failed, was a creature no bigger than his forearm. Pink skin. No scales. No armor plating. Just soft, vulnerable flesh. The infant looked up at him with wide eyes and wailed louder. A human baby. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. 3 cycles ago, Theron had stood in formation with 10,000 other soldiers and watched the Council broadcasts. Humanity was gone. Their homeworld was ash. Every colony eliminated. Every ship destroyed. The plague species had been removed from the galaxy for the good of all civilized life. The Dragonkin had celebrated with the others, believing the propaganda about how dangerous humans had been. But this tiny creature didn't look dangerous. It looked terrified and cold and desperately alone. Theron's training told him exactly what to do. Contact the Council immediately. Report the genetic anomaly. Let the proper authorities handle it. He reached for his communicator, his duty clear in his mind. His hand hovered over the device for a long moment. The baby's cries grew weaker. It was dying. The pod's life support had failed, and the thin atmosphere of this moon was poison to most species. But somehow, impossibly, this fragile human infant had survived for who knows how long. Theron made a decision that went against every regulation he'd ever followed. He scooped up the child, tucking it against his chest where his body heat could warm it. The crying stopped almost instantly. Tiny fingers, each one smaller than his smallest claw, reached up and grabbed onto his scales. The baby looked at him and made a small cooing sound. Something broke inside Theron's chest. Or maybe something long frozen finally thawed. He didn't know anymore. He searched the pod frantically, looking for anything that might help. There had to be supplies. Formula. Medicine. Something. Instead, he found a data chip barely larger than his talon. The label was in human script, a language the Council had forbidden anyone from learning. But Theron had seen enough human artifacts during the war to recognize a few words. This one said simply, Jake. Our son. Keep him safe. The baby had a name. Not just a specimen or a genetic sample. A name. Jake. Theron stood there on that dead moon, holding a member of an extinct species, and realized the full weight of what he'd just done. If anyone discovered this, he would be executed for treason. His entire family line would be dishonored. Everything he'd worked for would be destroyed. The baby grabbed his finger and held on tight. Such a small gesture. Such impossible strength in that tiny grip. Theron looked around at the wreckage. Someone had died getting this child here. Maybe multiple someones. They'd fled across the galaxy, evaded Council patrols, survived in a dying ship, all to give this one small life a chance. Who was he to let that sacrifice mean nothing? He tucked Jake carefully into his supply pack, making sure the child could breathe but stay hidden. Then Theron did something he never thought he'd do. He destroyed the evidence. The escape pod. The data chip. Every trace that a human had ever been on this moon. He scattered the debris and covered his tracks like he was running from the law. Because that's exactly what he was doing now. As Theron's ship lifted off from the surface, he looked down at the sleeping infant in the co-pilot's seat. The baby had finally stopped crying, apparently deciding that this strange scaled creature was safe enough to trust. Theron set course for Asheram, a frontier world so remote that most people forgot it existed. He'd heard they needed a way station guardian there. A job so boring and isolated that no one in their right mind would want it. Perfect. 15 years on Asheram changed everything. The way station sat at the edge of nowhere, a forgotten outpost where supply ships came twice a year and council inspectors maybe once a decade. It was perfect for keeping secrets. Jake grew up thinking the heavy gravity was normal. He didn't know that most species would be crushed under the weight that he ran and played in every day. To him, it was just home. The thin air that made Theron's lungs burn during their first year became easy for the boy to breathe. His body adapted in ways that shouldn't be possible. Theron watched it happen with a mixture of pride and terror. The boy was 7 when he first climbed the communication tower without safety gear, moving with a speed and confidence that made Theron's blood run cold. By 10, Jake could repair ship engines that baffled most trained mechanics. He'd watch Theron work once, maybe twice, then just understand how everything fit together. The Dragon Warrior had tried to be a good parent, though he had no idea what that meant for a human. He fed Jake protein rations and synthesized nutrients, hoping it was enough. He taught him to read using old star charts and maintenance manuals. And every night, he told Jake stories about the Dragonkin homeworld, carefully avoiding any mention of humans or the war. But Jake asked questions. Constant, endless questions that made Theron nervous. Why don't we ever visit other stations? Why don't I look like you? Where did I come from? Theron answered what he could and deflected the rest. He told himself the boy was too young to understand. Maybe when Jake was older. Maybe never. The truth felt like a bomb waiting to explode. When Jake turned 12, everything shifted. A trader stopped at the way station, the first visitor in 8 months. Theron had prepared Jake for this moment, drilling it into him over and over. Stay in the lower levels. Don't make noise. Don't be seen. Jake hid like he was supposed to. But the trader's ship had a leak in the plasma core that would have gone critical within hours. The trader didn't notice. Theron didn't have the tools to fix it. But Jake heard the problem from 3 levels down, recognized the subtle whine that meant imminent disaster, and couldn't just let people die. He slipped into the docking bay and repaired the leak in under 10 minutes, then disappeared before anyone saw him. The trader left confused about how his ship had been fixed, and Theron held Jake by the shoulders, torn between pride and absolute fury. The boy had saved lives but nearly exposed himself doing it. That's when Theron realized he couldn't keep Jake ignorant anymore. The boy's instincts were too good, his conscience too strong. If Jake didn't understand why he had to hide, he'd eventually do something heroic and stupid that would get them both killed. So Theron told him the truth. Not all of it at once, because even a brave 12-year-old could only handle so much. But piece by piece, over months, Jake learned what he was. He learned about humanity's first contact with the galaxy, how they'd arrived with hope and open hands. How they'd made friends with dozens of species. How their ideas about freedom and choice had started to spread. And how the Galactic Council had decided that was too dangerous to allow. Jake took it better than Theron expected. The boy didn't cry or rage or break down. He just got very quiet and very serious. Then he asked Theron to teach him how to fight. The training was brutal. Dragonkin combat techniques were designed for creatures with scales, claws, and natural armor. Jake had none of that. But he learned anyway, adapting the moves to work with his smaller, faster body. Theron taught him to think 3 steps ahead, to use an opponent's strength against them, to never fight fair if survival was on the line. By 14, Jake could take down targets twice his size. By 15, he'd beaten Theron in sparring twice, and the Dragon Warrior suspected the boy had been holding back to protect his ego. But it was Jake's mind that truly terrified Theron. The boy consumed every piece of information he could find, hacking into the way station's limited database to read military histories, tactical analyses, and engineering specifications. He'd study patrol patterns of ships passing through nearby space, predicting their routes with uncomfortable accuracy. Once, Jake sketched out a theoretical plan to disable the entire way station defense grid using nothing but a maintenance bot and 15 minutes of access. Theron had made him burn the plans, but the ease with which Jake had designed the attack kept him awake that night. This was why the Council had feared humans. Not because they were physically superior. They weren't. But they saw patterns others missed. They solved problems in ways no one else considered. And they never, ever accepted that something was impossible. The close call came during Jake's 15th year. A council inspection team arrived unannounced, something that should have been impossible. Theron barely had time to shove Jake into the ventilation system before the inspectors walked through the door. The inspection lasted 6 days. 6 days of Theron making excuses, answering questions, and trying not to glance at the ventilation grates. 6 days of Jake hiding in spaces barely large enough to crawl through, with no food and only condensation to drink. When the inspectors finally left, Theron found Jake still wedged in the ductwork, barely conscious but alive. Any other species would have died in those conditions. Most would have panicked and revealed themselves. But Jake had stayed silent, stayed hidden, and survived through pure stubborn willpower. As Theron carried the boy to the medical bay, Jake whispered through cracked lips, "How much longer can we do this?" Theron didn't have an answer. He just held the boy tighter and hoped they'd have enough time to figure it out. But time, as they were about to discover, had just run out. The medical scanner beeped 3 times before everything went wrong. Jake had collapsed during training, pushing himself too hard as usual. Theron had panicked and made a mistake he'd never forgive himself for. He used the way station's emergency medical scanner, the one connected to the Council's health network. The machine analyzed Jake's blood, his DNA, his entire genetic structure. Then it froze. Red warnings flashed across the screen. An automated alert transmitted before Theron could even reach the control panel to stop it. They had maybe 2 hours. 3 if they were lucky. Jake recovered consciousness to find Theron throwing supplies into cargo containers with frantic speed. The dragon's scales were pale with fear, something Jake had never seen before. "We're leaving. Now. Don't ask questions, just move." Jake didn't argue. He'd learned to trust Theron's instincts. Within 20 minutes, they had the ship loaded. Within 30, they were breaking atmosphere. Within 40, the first Council Enforcer ships dropped out of hyperspace behind them. The chase was immediate and brutal. 3 heavy cruisers against their small transport vessel. Theron pushed the engines past safe limits, but it wasn't enough. They were outgunned, outmaneuvered, and running out of space to run. That's when Jake saw the pattern. The way the Enforcer ships moved, their formation, the slight delay in their communication network. He'd studied hundreds of Council tactical files over the years, memorizing their procedures without really understanding why. Now he understood. Now it mattered. "Take us through the cargo lanes," Jake said, his voice steady despite the fear pumping through his veins. "Heading 270, then hard dive on my mark." Theron didn't question it. He'd learned to trust Jake's instincts too. They plunged into the busy shipping corridor, weaving between massive cargo haulers. The Enforcer ships followed, but their larger size made them clumsy in traffic. Jake watched their positions, calculated speeds and trajectories in his head, and saw the opening. "Mark. Now, hard dive and kill the engines." Theron obeyed. Their ship dropped like a stone and went dark. Above them, the 3 Enforcer cruisers shot past, unable to stop their momentum. By the time they realized their prey had vanished, Jake had already rerouted them toward the nearest hyperspace jump point. But the victory was temporary. Alarms screamed across every Council frequency. More ships were coming. Lots more. They jumped to the outer reaches, that lawless space between proper civilized systems where authorities rarely ventured. It bought them time, but not safety. Theron's navigation console lit up with alerts. Council forces were mobilizing across a dozen sectors. Blockades were forming. Someone really wanted them dead. During their 3rd jump, Theron started coughing. At first, Jake thought it was just stress. Then he saw the blood. The dragon had taken a hit during their escape, a glancing blow from an energy weapon that had burned through the ship's hull. He'd said nothing, just kept flying. Now the wound was turning dark, spreading across his chest in ugly purple lines. "It's nothing," Theron wheezed. "Just need to rest." But it wasn't nothing. Jake had read enough medical files to know what a Council energy weapon did to organic tissue. The burn was going septic, poison spreading through Theron's bloodstream. Without proper treatment, it would kill him in days. They needed help, but where could they go? Every Council-aligned world would turn them in. Every hospital was monitored. They were completely alone. Except they weren't. While Theron slept, Jake did something reckless. He hacked into the Council's communication network using access codes he'd memorized from the way station. What he found made his blood run cold. The alerts weren't just about capturing them. They were about him specifically. Every message said the same thing: human survivor confirmed. Extreme threat level. Eliminate on sight. Human survivor. Not the only human. A human. Jake dug deeper, following data trails and encrypted messages. And there, buried in classified files, he found proof. 17 other alerts over the past 15 years. Different locations. Different ages. All humans. All supposedly eliminated. But what if they hadn't been? What if others had survived, just like him? The question became irrelevant when Theron's condition worsened. The dragon was fading, his breathing shallow and labored. Jake sent out a desperate signal on an old resistance frequency he'd found in the archives, not even sure if anyone would answer. 2 hours later, a response came. Coordinates. No explanation. Just a location deep in the outer reaches and a single word, come. Jake plotted the course with shaking hands. It could be a trap. Probably was a trap. But Theron was dying, and they had nowhere else to go. As they approached the coordinates, Jake saw something impossible. A station that didn't exist on any official map. Ships of 24 different species, all bearing marks that identified them as rebels, pirates, and outlaws. The kind of place the council pretended didn't exist. A docking signal guided them in. Jake landed the ship with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. The bay doors opened, and a medical team rushed forward. Not council doctors in their sterile white uniforms, but a mix of species he'd never seen working together before. They took Theron on a stretcher, already working to stabilize him. An elderly alien with 4 arms and kind eyes approached Jake. "You're safe here, child. We've been watching for you for a long time. Come. There's much you need to know, and not much time to explain it." Jake followed, glancing back at Theron's unconscious form. The dragon had saved his life 15 years ago on a dead moon. Now strangers were trying to save the dragon's life. The symmetry felt important somehow. As they walked deeper into the station, Jake noticed something odd. Symbols on the walls. Designs that seemed familiar even though he'd never seen them before. Human designs. Human language. "Who are you people?" he asked. The alien smiled sadly. "We're the ones who said no. The ones who knew the truth about what the council did. And we've been waiting a very long time for humanity to come back." The station was called Haven, though that name appeared on no official records. Jake walked through corridors that felt wrong in the best way possible. The doors were sized for human proportions. The gravity was set to Earth standard, whatever Earth had been. Even the lighting had a warmth that made his eyes relax in ways the harsh way station lights never had. The elderly alien, who introduced herself as Elder Nissa, led him to a medical bay where Theron lay in a stasis pod. Machines hummed around the dragon's body, fighting the poison spreading through his system. "Will he live?" Jake asked, pressing his hand against the pod's cool surface. "We stopped the infection. But the damage was severe. He needs time to heal. Weeks, maybe months." Nissa placed one of her 4 hands gently on Jake's shoulder. "He saved your life. That makes him family to all of us here." Family. The word felt strange. Jake had only ever had Theron. The idea of more people, of belonging to something larger, didn't quite fit in his head yet. Nissa led him deeper into the station, to a room that made Jake's breath catch. One entire wall was covered in photographs, data chips, and handwritten notes. Hundreds of faces stared back at him. Human faces. "This is our archive," Nissa explained. "Everything we managed to save about humanity before the council erased it all. Their history. Their culture. Their music, art, and literature. We've guarded it for 15 years, waiting." Jake moved closer, drawn to the images. He'd seen his own reflection plenty of times, but seeing other humans, seeing the diversity of faces and expressions, made something crack open inside his chest. He wasn't alone. He'd never been alone. "There were billions of us," he whispered. 12 billion on Earth alone. Another 3 billion spread across 47 colony worlds. Nissa's voice carried old grief. In 1 week, the council reduced that to scattered survivors. Maybe a few hundred escaped. We don't know how many made it. Jake turned to her. "Why? What did we do that was so terrible?" Nissa gestured for him to sit. What she told him next rewrote everything Jake thought he knew about the galaxy. Humans had arrived 60 years ago, stumbling into galactic civilization with primitive ships and embarrassing optimism. They should have been conquered or ignored. Instead, something unexpected happened. Humans made friends. Not the formal alliances the council approved of, but real friendships. They learned languages not out of duty but curiosity. They asked questions nobody else thought to ask. Simple things like, why do we do it this way? And what if we tried something different? Within 10 years, human diplomats had negotiated peace between species that had been at war for centuries. Human engineers had solved problems that stumped the galaxy's best minds, not because they were smarter, but because they approached challenges from angles no one else considered. Human artists created works that moved people across every culture. But the real threat came from human philosophy. Ideas about equality, freedom, and choice. Dangerous concepts in a galaxy ruled by rigid hierarchy. The council maintained order by keeping species in their designated roles. Humans kept suggesting that maybe people should choose their own roles. The council saw what was coming, Nissa said. In another generation, maybe two, the entire galactic order would have shifted. Not through war, but through ideas. They couldn't allow it. Jake's hands clenched into fists. So they killed everyone. Not everyone. Look. Nissa activated a holographic display. 17 red markers appeared scattered across a galactic map. Dates, locations, and brief descriptions accompanied each one. 17 confirmed human survivors we've tracked. There was an infant found in an asteroid field 4 years ago. A teenager discovered on a farming world 7 years back. An elderly woman who'd been hiding in plain sight as a medical researcher. All reported to the council. All supposedly eliminated. Jake's heart hammered. Supposedly? We intercepted some of those elimination teams. Not all, but some. 3 survivors are here at Haven right now. 2 more are in hiding at other safe locations. The rest? Nissa's expression darkened. We don't know. Maybe dead. Maybe still out there, not knowing they're not alone. She pulled up another file. And then there's you. The first human to actually fight back and survive. You destroyed half an Enforcer squadron, Jake. The galaxy is paying attention. Jake stared at the map, his mind racing. 17 possible survivors. Maybe more the council never found. Maybe others hidden so well that even Haven's network couldn't locate them. I want to meet them. The ones here. Nissa smiled. I thought you might. She led him to a common area where 3 people sat today. Real, actual humans. A girl about his age with dark skin and cautious eyes. An older man, maybe 40, with gray threading through his hair. And a boy who couldn't have been more than 8, playing with a mechanical toy. They all looked up when Jake entered. For a long moment, nobody spoke. What do you say to people who share your extinction? The girl stood first. You're the one everyone's talking about. The one who escaped. Yeah. I'm Jake. Riley. She studied him with an intensity that made Jake want to squirm. They say you were raised by a dragonkin. That true? His name is Theron. His dying to keep me safe. The older man approached, extending his hand in a gesture Jake recognized from old human files. A handshake. Jake took it, and something passed between them. Recognition. Solidarity. I'm Owen. This is my son, Tyler. We've been here 3 years. Owen's grip was firm. It's good to meet you, kid. Really good. They talked for hours. Sharing stories, comparing experiences, piecing together fragments of humanity's history. Riley had been found by a smuggler who couldn't turn in a baby for bounty money. Owen had survived because he'd been in deep space when the attack came, managing to hide Tyler and run. Each story was different, but the core was the same. Someone had chosen to save them instead of following orders. Tyler, the youngest, fell asleep against Jake's shoulder. The weight felt significant somehow. This small life, depending on him just by existing. What happens now? Riley asked. The whole galaxy knows you exist. They'll come for all of us eventually. Jake looked at the 3 other humans, then at the map showing 17 possible survivors. He thought about Theron dying in a medical pod. About the billions who'd been killed for asking questions. About the elderly alien and her people who'd protected human knowledge for 15 years. An idea formed. Crazy. Impossible. Exactly the kind of thing Theron had taught him humans were known for. What if we stop hiding? Jake said slowly. What if we show the galaxy exactly what they tried to destroy? Owen raised an eyebrow. That's suicide. Maybe. Or maybe it's the only way to actually survive. Jake stood, careful not to wake Tyler. The council fears human ideas more than human weapons. So let's give them something to really fear. Let's tell the truth. Riley grinned. It wasn't a nice expression. I'm listening. The message went out 3 days later, broadcast on every frequency the galaxy used. No encryption. No hiding. Just Jake's face filling screens across 1,000 worlds, speaking words that would change everything. My name is Jake. I'm human. For 15 years, the Galactic Council told you we were all dead. They lied. It took less than an hour for the galaxy to explode. Jake stood in Haven's command center, watching the chaos unfold. News networks erupted with emergency broadcasts. Government channels scrambled to deny or confirm. Social networks across dozens of species lit up with arguments, theories, and something the Council hadn't expected. Questions. If they lied about this, what else did they lie about? Elder Nissa monitored the incoming data streams, her 4 hands moving across multiple consoles. "We're getting responses. 3 more human survivors have made contact. They saw your broadcast and decided to risk revealing themselves. 20 humans now. 20 voices where the council had promised silence. But Jake's message hadn't just been about survival. He'd done something more dangerous. He'd told the truth about why humanity was eliminated. Not the official story about humans being aggressive or diseased. The real reason. Because human ideas threatened the council's power. And he'd invited anyone who'd ever questioned the council to stand with them. The response was immediate and terrifying. Within 12 hours, the council mobilized the largest military fleet in galactic history. 3,000 warships, all converging on the outer reaches. They weren't just coming to capture a few human survivors. They were coming to make an example that would terrify the galaxy into silence for another 1,000 years. Theron woke from stasis 2 days before the fleet arrived. He was weak, his scales still bearing dark scars from the poison, but his eyes were clear. "You did what?" he rasped when Jake explained. "I told everyone the truth. Now they're coming to kill us." Theron tried to laugh but ended up coughing instead. "That's the most human thing I've ever heard. Terrible tactical sense. No survival instinct. Completely insane." He gripped Jake's hand. "I'm proud of you." Jake felt his throat tighten. "They're going to destroy this station. Everyone here will die because of what I did." "Maybe. Or maybe you just started something that can't be stopped." Theron sat up slowly, wincing. "The council rules through fear and control. You just showed the galaxy that humans refuse to be controlled. Some species will hate you for it. But others..." He smiled. "Others have been waiting for someone to say what you said." Theron was right. As the council fleet approached, something unexpected happened. Ships started appearing around Haven. Not military vessels, but civilian transports, cargo haulers, and personal ships. Hundreds of them, from dozens of different species. They positioned themselves between Haven and the approaching fleet. Nissa's voice shook as she read the incoming messages. "They're forming a blockade. A civilian blockade. They're saying if the council wants to destroy Haven, they'll have to go through them first." Jake watched the display in disbelief. Species he'd never heard of, people he'd never met, putting themselves between the council's guns and a station full of refugees. All because of one broadcast. One truth. The council fleet stopped just outside weapons range. For 3 days, there was a standoff. The council threatened. The civilians refused to move. More ships arrived every hour, swelling the defensive line. Then something happened that no one predicted. A sabotaged weapon aboard one of the council's flagships went critical. Someone, maybe a dissident in their own ranks, had programmed a torpedo to malfunction. Instead of a controlled detonation, it would go supernova, destroying not just the fleet but the nearby systems. Billions of lives. The council's own engineers couldn't stop it. The weapon was already armed, counting down. Evacuation was impossible. They had maybe 20 minutes. Jake saw the readings and understood immediately what would happen. The council had come to kill humans, but they were about to cause the largest disaster in galactic history. Riley found him in the command center, staring at the countdown. "We should let them die. It's justice." "It's not justice. It's just more death." Jake pulled up Haven's ship roster. They had one combat vessel, an old cruiser that barely functioned. But it had one thing the council ships lacked. A modified shield system that might, possibly, contain a supernova blast long enough to redirect it into empty space. Might. Possibly. The odds were terrible. "You're thinking about saving them," Riley said. "The people who killed our entire species." "I'm thinking about saving the billions of innocent people in those systems who didn't do anything wrong." Owen joined them, Tyler asleep on his shoulders. "If we do this, we might not survive. That ship has to get close to the blast. Very close." Jake looked at the other humans. 20 souls, all that remained of 12 billion. Each one precious and irreplaceable. Theron once told me that humans were feared because they inspired loyalty across species boundaries. Because they refused to accept that some problems couldn't be solved. Because they believed in impossible things. Jake straightened. Let's show them he was right. The decision was made. Jake piloted the cruiser himself, with Theron beside him despite his injuries. They accelerated toward the council flagship, broadcasting their intentions. The council tried to stop them, confused and desperate. The civilian blockade held firm, preventing any interference. Jake brought the cruiser alongside the armed torpedo with seconds to spare. Theron activated the modified shields, creating a containment field around the weapon. The explosion came like a newborn star, white-hot and furious. The shields held. Barely. The cruiser's hull screamed with stress. Systems failed one after another. But they held long enough to redirect the blast away from inhabited space, out into the void where it could hurt no one. When the light faded, Jake and Theron's ship was a burnt-out wreck, but they were alive. And the galaxy had watched everything. The Council fleet stood down. How could they destroy the humans who just saved billions of their own people? How could they maintain that humans were a threat when humanity had sacrificed everything to prevent a disaster the Council had caused? The standoff ended not with battle but with silence. The Council fleet withdrew, and the civilian ships erupted in celebration. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. More humans emerged from hiding, bringing their number to 32. Species that had never questioned the Council began demanding answers. Reform movements spread across 100 worlds. The Council tried to maintain control, but the foundation had cracked. You can't rule through fear once people have seen courage. You can't demand obedience once people have tasted freedom. Jake stood in Haven's observation deck, watching ships come and go. Humans were still hunted in some sectors. Still feared in others. But they were no longer alone, and they were no longer silent. Theron joined him, moving easier now as his body healed. What are you thinking about? About what comes next. We're not strong enough to fight the Council. Not yet. Maybe not ever. You're not supposed to fight them. Theron smiled. You're supposed to change them. That's what humans do. You ask questions nobody else thinks to ask. You imagine futures nobody else believes in. And somehow, impossibly, you make those futures real. Jake thought about that. About the choice one dragonkin had made 15 years ago on a dead moon. About the choice he'd made to tell the truth instead of staying hidden. About all the small, impossible choices that had led to this moment. The Council was right to fear us, Jake said quietly. Not because we're warriors or conquerors. But because we refuse to accept that things can't change. That, Theron said, placing a scaled hand on Jake's shoulder, is exactly why you'll win. Below them, a ship bearing human survivors docked at Haven. More voices joining the chorus. More hope returning to a galaxy that had tried to extinguish it. The war wasn't over. It might never be over. But for the first time in 15 years, humanity had a future. And that future started with one simple question, the same question that had terrified the Council from the beginning. Why not?